Jimmy Carter succeeded President Ford, taking the presidency from 1977 to 1981. Carter was a Democrat and a Washington outsider. People liked him because he was not connected to the Washington scandals, to Watergate, or anyone involved. He was also a charming Southerner. In the middle of his presidency, one of the more difficult things that Carter faced was the meltdown of the nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. This was a terrible scare for people in the United States, and Americans began to fear nuclear power more than ever. They began to favor oil despite its great expense. However, the meltdown led to greater control over nuclear energy and reorganization of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was a good thing. Carter also granted amnesty to all draft dodgers of the Vietnam War. This was one of the more controversial things that he did because it angered many Americans, especially veterans and their families who'd served in the Vietnam War. It was intended, however, as a healing gesture, and Carter did succeed in that to some extent. In 1979, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, known as OPEC, raised oil prices 50%. This was terrible for the United States because, of course, we were heavily dependent on foreign oil, being a highly industrialized nation, and it means that we have to cut back. This means that we're in an energy crisis. So, in 1977, the Department of Energy is created to address energy conservation and research and also develop new energy sources. In 1978, Carter hosted Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the presidential retreat known as Camp David. At Camp David, he negotiated a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. This was quite a challenge because of their long-standing conflict, and so this was a great accomplishment for Carter. The results were known as the Camp David Accords. Towards the very end of his presidency, Carter faced the Iran hostage crisis. What happened in this situation was the military Islamic leader Ayatollah Khomeini seized power in Iran, ousting the Shah of Iran and forcing him to flee. The United States sheltered the Shah, allowed him to come here for medical care, and Khomeini's followers were insulted by this act. They stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in retaliation and took 70 Americans hostage. Carter, unfortunately, was unable to bring an end to the hostage crisis, and the hostages were not released until Reagan's inauguration. In 1980, Carter led the U.S. in a boycott in the participation of the Moscow Olympics, and this was to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And in 1977, Carter gave the Panama Canal back to Panama, back to the country of Panama. This was effective in the year 2000, and it was designed to strengthen our relationship with Latin America, which of course we've had a very rocky relationship with. Tired of the democratic politics, Ronald Reagan was elected after Carter, serving from 1981 to 1989. Reagan is a Republican, a conservative. And the first thing that happens when he steps into office is that there's an end to the Iran hostage crisis. Very shortly after his inauguration, the hostages were on a plane on their way home. Reagan increased defense spending because he wanted to intimidate the USSR, and this caused our national debt to soar. Another unpleasant fact about Reagan's administration was the Iran-Contra affair. Basically, the United States wanted to interfere in a civil war in Nicaragua because we wanted to prevent a communist government from coming into power there. So we supported the Contras, who were fighting against the Sandinista government, which was a communist government. We secretly sold missiles to Iran through Israel, and then used that money to support the Contras in Nicaragua. So it's a very convoluted affair. And eventually, investigations cleared Reagan of direct involvement, but several of his main aides were convicted. Reagan, and we've talked about this, has supported the idea of trickle-down economics, aka Reaganomics. This is the idea, of course, that money poured in at the top of the pyramid, so big businesses and banks, will eventually trickle down to medium and smaller sized businesses, and then hopefully the very bottom, which is workers, employees. The idea is that we can cut taxes, deregulate big business, and stimulate savings and investment. So profits went up for many of these corporations because, as you know, money gets stuck at the top, but salaries for the workers at the bottom of the pyramid did not. However, Reagan had modest success in this. Inflation did go down, stock trading did go up, but it did not improve the lives of the poor and working class people at the bottom of the pyramid. In the next video, we'll talk about President George H.W. Bush and also President Bill Clinton.